It's easy to get lost. This is the Revenue Maze, and I'm Valerie Cobb. Join me as we navigate the halls, dead ends, and U-turns on your path towards upward growth trajectory. The Revenue Maze is sponsored by Revenue North Star, guidance and execution through fractional revenue leadership, uncovering hidden revenues, and empowering small business growth through process-driven sales customized to your company environment. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great episode of the Revenue Maze. I'm so excited about this guest. There's some roots that are near and dear to my heart. But first of all, he loves nature, loves hiking, an avid, obviously a guitar player. So we'll get into that just a little bit. And at this point, I would love to just welcome Finnur Pind, CEO of Treble Technologies.
Great. Hi, Valerie. Thanks so much for having me on board. I love that I'm here. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah. This is going to be such a fun discussion because music obviously is near and dear to my heart for many, many reasons. And there are so many fabulous things that you are doing in the sound space. So, anyways, and we'll get through that and weave the story and have a really good time today. But first of all, we always answer the same premise question, which is what is one thing that you can tell listeners and viewers that can help them get out of the revenue maze?
Right. That's a really good question, and there are many answers, no doubt, and many things to consider. But at least when you ask me this, then well, the first thing that comes to mind is really kind of solving problems, solving customers' problems, and not just kind of solving them, but solving them much better than what the solutions they have today can offer. So, being 10 times better, I think that's a good kind of rule of thumb to keep in mind. If you're solving something 10 times better than what people are used to today, then in my experience, then they start getting interested. If it's just 2 times better, maybe not. So be 10 times better and really kind of obsess about your customers and their problems. And, in my case, I was there for many years on the other side, kind of using these tools and so on. We can get into what we do and all that. And so I've really kind of been there, know the pains and frustrations, and then kind of coming and trying to solve them much better. So that's my recommendation. Of course, like I say, many other things to consider, go-to-market strategy, etc. But that's one thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up 10 times versus 2 times, because one of the things that we always say is the pain of same has got to be greater than the pain of change, right? Because we'll put up with 2 times, right? We'll not put up with 10 times, right?
Exactly.
If it's really a pain point and you're solving that challenge, then the motivation for somebody to actually look at that as a solution, not just a nice to have, has got to be a lot more than just, hey, it's a little better,
Exactly.
So anyways, but
Exactly.
let's kind of dive into that, just 2 to 3 things, but how exactly, and we can weave kind of some of the cool stuff that you're doing into this storytelling, but
Mm.
at the end of the day, how exactly have you been able to quantify 10 times versus 2 times? I'm just curious about that. And you're an engineer,
Right.
so we can get into the metrics.
I mean, yeah, that's a great question, and in some cases it's straightforward. Like, hey, I have a solution that takes, let's say a calculation. I need to do a calculation as an engineer, and it takes 100 seconds. And now comes a new solution that takes 10 seconds, and it's 10 times faster. So in that sense, it's kind of straightforward. In other areas, it's much more nuanced, obviously, and kind of how you gauge performance increase or time saved or improved quality or things like that that can be harder to gauge. So I don't have like a simple answer that covers everything. But in our case, it's been a lot about efficiency and kind of
Okay.
improving efficiency for our users. The way that they do things today is inefficient and time consuming, expensive, etc. And being able to address that And then, like I said, then it's kind of straightforward to get some metrics on that to show, hey, you save this much, you work this much faster, the quality improves by this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of the ways that sometimes people don't understand. So, from the engineering side of the fence, which I am not one, so I don't even play one on TV, but I have worked with many engineers, especially um, in just different places like construction and heavy equipment, and there's different types of engineers as well, but
Mm,
they definitely find ways to measure what I would say is the um, measuring the qualification metrics. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about when you're saying, well, you can see the
mm,
efficiency, but a lot of times when you get into companies, they'll go, well, I don't know how to tell that, you know.
mm,
But for
mhm.
an engineer, that's like second nature. It's like, well, it has to be a little bit, in this sense, louder or softer or in between,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and you can actually measure, but then you built your company around some challenge in the industries that is very unique. So I actually am going to pull the trigger a little bit sooner on kind of what you guys do, but it's a
Right,
unique industry, and it's really fun to have guests on my show that are coming forward with some very different ways of looking at things. And so
right.
I'd love for you to just share with us a little bit about why you even went that direction, honestly, because it wouldn't have been something I would have thought of when I was ideating, right?
All
So,
right, right, right. Yeah. So, Treble is working in the world of sound, like you said in the beginning. And my personal interest in sound comes from music. I think much like yours as well.
yeah.
And back in the day, I was kind of spending almost all of my time just obsessing about music and playing music and getting my guitar to sound as kind of weird and different as possible. And that was took all of my energy, and tried that for quite a few years, and it was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, but at some point, I sort of I guess I realized that maybe I need to make a living, and
You got to pay the bills. All of us
yeah,
starving musicians learn that we got to
yeah,
pay the bills.
exactly, exactly. Kind of have to grow up at some point or whatever. But
Did you
and then
grow up? I'm
I
curious.
don't know. I
Oh,
don't know.
okay.
Probably not. No reason to do that. And yeah, and then I kind of I was interested in all this sound stuff, and like how does this guitar amplifier work, or this guitar effect, or the recording software, or all this stuff. So it kind of led me onto a path of engineering, and then kind of what we call acoustics engineering, which is the science of engineering sound. And through that study line, I got to know kind of more than just music technology, and I got to into this field of acoustics, and sound in buildings and so on, and ended up doing research on kind of sound simulation. And sound simulation, now I'm coming to what Treble is doing, which is essentially sound simulation.
Hmm.
And what, simulation is this concept of, you have a computer model of something, and you can simulate how that thing is going to behave in reality. And it can be simulating, wind outside, or how people behave, or structural dynamics, or whatever. But in our case, it's sound. So you have a 3D model of something, let's say a car, and you want to know how the car is going to sound.
Okay.
And and that kind of the notion of simulating sound in computers, that's been around for many years, but doing that efficiently and effectively has not been possible to a good extent up until now, and that's what Treble is bringing to the table.
It's interesting that you bring that up a little bit, because one of the things that I have noticed is, at first you went on this journey of, hey, this is interesting, I got to grow up, all this kind of stuff, but then you found that there was a necessity. And everybody knows this, I'm a big fan of Matt Dixon and the Challenger sale methodology and the Challenger customer. And in that methodology, they have a use case for Xerox, which was pivoting, from obviously people printing versus people creating digital copies versus a lot of other things. But one of the challenges that Xerox was up against is that transition to the digital world and still remaining viable. But also back in the day, most of our printing was black and white
Mm.
because color, first of all, was very expensive, and you had to send it to obviously a print shop to get it done. And then, of course, home printers. And you're going, Valerie, where the heck are you going with this? But in all reality, I am getting to a destination. But anyway, um, so they did a study and they found that children's grades and attention and everything went up in schools when information was in color versus black and white. So if they had print in black and white, and so they ended up with this entire use case to the education community of going to color. Had nothing to do with them personally, organization personally, but it did solve a challenge. Grades went up, all of those things. And the reason I'm bringing this home back to what you're doing is acoustically and the sound engineering and things like that. I think people underappreciate what that means. Like we get,
Mm.
if you watched a movie without, if just the actors acting and not the sound overlay and all of those things, emotionally, the impact is very, very small. It's kind of like, oh, it looks like a what we would say a grade school project, right? You know, it's a bunch of friends running around and pretending, you know,
All right.
and that's it. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you add the sound engineering to it. And then you do that in a digestible way so that other
Mm.
organizations can have it repeatedly, right?
Hmm.
Um, the implications are huge, not just in Hollywood or Bollywood or wherever you want, whatever
No, right.
country, you know, but testing how the sounds would be and some of those things are what I found so interesting about having you on as a guest. So I'm sure you've done some studies with that. You're an engineer. So tell
Right.
us just a little bit about that because I'm curious, you know, what you
Yeah.
found on that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The first thing that popped to mind when you were describing that was exactly what George Lucas, the famous film director, said. He said sound is at least 50% of the experience. Of the Star Wars movies. So indeed, kind of Hollywood and all of those things. That's a nice example of where sound is super important. But like you're alluding to, just in kind of regular bread and butter normal style buildings, for example, let's say take schools, hospitals, office buildings. There's been so much research done throughout the years that shows very kind of clearly and unequivocally that sound has a huge impact on people, and how productive they are, how well they perform in schools, how fast they heal in hospitals. We see, in cases where noise levels are high and so on in hospitals, that people use more pain medication. There's more cases of rehospitalization, longer time to recover, etc. It's really amazing how big of an impact it has.
Yeah.
And like no, how much noise impacts people. Is some kind of it's something that maybe people don't think about so much, but the really kind of frightening statistics, like noise is the second most harmful environmental factor affecting human health, according to the World Health Organization, just after
Wow.
bad air quality. And like I don't know how many millions of healthy life years are lost every year in Europe due to noise, according to the World Health Organization. So it has a huge impact. Yeah, and this was kind of built environment examples, but the same goes, for communication, like we're doing right now.
Mhm.
Virtual meetings and things like this. Having poor sound quality really fatigues the brain. That's been shown that as well. So this concept of Zoom fatigue, which kind of came about after COVID, where people were sitting in virtual meetings all day and just kind of wiped after the day, has been shown to be linked to the sound, and kind of how it's not the
Wow.
same as being in a real meeting room, being on Zoom and so on. So yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because if we were to take a journey and people would close their eyes, I think they would connect immediately with what you just said, right? Because we all know that a very negative sound makes us just
Mm.
tense, right? And yeah, even the recording that we're doing right now, we do special mics, so it sounds like that FM DJ voice, kind of I can only do it, right? But I remember years of practicing, and as a singer, um, if the acoustics in the room were wrong, it affected how you sang, how well you did. You immediately lost confidence or gained confidence with that. And rewinding, and it dates me. I'm sorry, but back in the old cassette where you would just record and then you'd listen to yourself and you're like, well, that sounds terrible. I never want to talk again on anything. And then realizing, oh well, that was not the quite the shower acoustics,
Right,
right? We always say we can sing
right,
in the shower, right?
right, right,
And I'm
right,
sure
right.
when you were messing around with your guitar, it was the same thing. You were trying to make different sounds for different reasons. But
Yeah,
wow, super
yeah.
exciting, super exciting. So how did you talked a little bit about your guitar? I think
Hmm.
you mentioned that your dad's an engineer. So how did you get here besides just the guitar? Let's talk about that, and then we'll talk a little bit about Iceland and some hiking.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I did this study. I studied acoustics engineering, and then I went back into the industry and was working as what's called an acoustic consultant. So my role was to help architects design buildings and make sure that they would sound good. And I'm not. Of course, we did like music venues and concert halls and so on, and that's important to have good acoustics in those. But
Yeah.
mostly, we're talking about office buildings, schools, hospitals, these kind of bread and butter style buildings. And during that time, did this for a few years. Sort of really came kind of frustrated with a lack of tools to be able to do this, to be able to know, is this design actually going to be okay or not? Be able to showcase it to stakeholders, to architects or the building owner, like here, if you go for this solution, your building is going to sound like this, versus if you spend a little more money, then it's going to sound like this, and
Mhm.
not having any tools to be able to do this. That's kind of this kind of we're talking about what I talked about at the beginning, kind of obsessing about the customer problems. Now I was very obsessed with my problems as an engineer in the industry at that time. And then I got an opportunity to go back to school and do a PhD on researching technology to essentially address this very problem. And that was very fun. Did that for a few years. And we just ended up with a kind of promising prototype of a technology that allows you to do this, to simulate the sound, to know if the design is good or not, to be able to hear the building, walk around in it, look around in a virtual model, and also hear it.
Yeah.
And then we decided to form a startup around that and turn this kind of, let's say, academic prototype into a product. So that's
Yeah.
sort of how it came about. And and in the beginning, we were, very much thinking about the building industry. We wanted to do a piece of software for architects and engineers to be able to design sound in buildings, and that remains an important part of what we do. But then we also sort of slowly started realizing that having the ability to simulate sound has use cases beyond just building design. So we've worked a lot with, consumer electronics, automotive industry, virtual experiences, and so on, where it's all, also beneficial to be able to simulate sound.
Yeah, because you think of let's just talk about the efficiency just in the construction industry alone.
Mm.
Let's just take a church.
Hmm.
How many churches have to be redesigned because they screwed up how their musicians would work out in their halls?
Absolutely.
Or how many hospitals or any kind of sensitive kind of environment have had to redesign over and over and over again because they didn't even realize that the sound was causing part of what that was. You've got an architect who's drawing something, and
Hmm.
then, oh wait, what does the sound seem like? What
Hmm.
happens? Are you in I can imagine, are you in Dubai, in a busy, bustling city? What kind of apartment complex do you build? What kind of, and yeah, and
Hmm.
then going on beyond what you were saying, even with some of the music and everything else. But it's super cool stuff that you're working through. So,
Hmm.
anyways, now's the fun part too. I mean, you're a big nature fan and you love hiking and all of that, and you're probably doing your day job to do your play job, right? Although you get to play while but
Absolutely, love my job, but yeah.
what's your favorite hike?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of living in Iceland is that we have so much access to so much of, let's say, unspoiled nature. That's yeah, and I would say the best way to explore Iceland is to go out there and hike, and like I would say maybe 90. I think it's something like 90% of the country's area is uninhabited, and it's even kind of hard to access it during winter. But then during summer, there's just endless of kind of, or not endless, but let's say a lot of area of kind of unspoiled nature that you can explore. Take the tent on your back and walk for 4 or 5 days. It's an amazing feeling. For example, in the West Fjords in Iceland, which is, yeah, that's probably my favorite area to hike. So
I
yeah,
I I bet it's a bucket list. I mentioned that before. It's a bucket
right.
list, and a lot of the name can be deceiving because if you've ever watched the travel channels, I mean, when they show Iceland, it's like, oh my gosh, that is so incredibly beautiful, and definitely want to get there someday
Right,
for
right.
sure. Well, tell me one mentor that you had.
Wow, great question. I've had a few great mentors. I think the first name that popped to mind, his name is Jakob Stroman. He's a partner at Henning Larsen. Henning Larsen is an architect firm, one of the big architect firms in Scandinavia,
Uh-huh.
and he's partner there and director of their innovation and sustainability. And he was really involved in my research when we were sort of developing this originally because we did it in collaboration with Henning Larsen, and he is just an inspirational guy, and he's so good at kind of connecting, let's say, kind of research and complicated stuff with reality and real world problems that was really needed for me during this research work, because it's easy when you're doing academic research to just kind of focus on research for research's sake, but he kind of kept pulling me back to reality, and kind of, we have this problem right now. We're always designing buildings, and we don't know anything about how they sound in the beginning, and we make all the design choices in the early stages without thinking about sound at all. So we need to focus on this problem, and yeah, and I've been very fortunate to work with him ever since the research. So he's involved in Treble, is a member of our board, and yeah, great,
Very,
great guy.
very cool. Very cool. And what's next for you guys? What's on the radar?
Right. So we launched our first product actually just early this year. So we're still kind of a rather new company. We've been around for 3 years. So there's really kind of exciting times ahead. We're putting out our second product now in the fall, which is more. So the first product was tailored towards building design. The next one is more tailored towards, consumer electronics, audio hardware design, and things like that. And we have some really kind of exciting pilot customers. Many of the big tech companies, we're working with them these days. So yeah, kind of continuing this growth, releasing this second product, new funding round, scaling. Yeah, exciting times ahead.
It sounds super exciting, and I'm super excited to watch it grow for sure. So, tell us, kind of listeners and viewers, tell us one place they can get a hold of you.
You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best bet. I'm very kind of, I really love it when people engage there and reach out to me there. So LinkedIn is probably the best option. Treble also has a website, obviously, that you can get a hold of Treble and me through the website. So yeah, those are two options.
Oh, it's a fun website, and it's super cool there. And we will obviously list all of that in the notes. But yeah, this has been really fun learning more about you, your organization, how it came into being. Obviously, in the United States, it would be very exciting. I don't know if you're coming this way sometime soon, but it would be super exciting to kind of see what you guys are all up to. And I'm just grateful so much for you being on the show, and for the listeners and viewers also. Thank you so much. Share some love. Yeah, maybe we could get Finnur to play his guitar if you shared some love. I'm just kidding. At the end, we'll have that instead of Rachmaninoff at the beginning. Anyway, thank you again, Finnur, for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a wonderful chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining another great episode. Hats off to all you small businesses out there. I can't wait for the next episode.